Rite of Passage, the podcast with Giabra Martin.
Wonderful. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on when you're watching this. We are here today with author Adrienne H. Lee. How are you today?
I am fine. It is Friday. I have my emotional support coffee. So,
Oh, yes. Same here.
yep, gotta have
Running
that.
low, but yeah.
Gotta have the Java. But I'm doing okay. Thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah. I am doing very well. I am glad you're here.
Thank you.
I got a lot of podcast scheduled. It's amazing. I'm like
Good.
meeting just all kinds of incredible people. So I'm stoked. I mean, I'm like, I'm hyped up about this. I was looking into you ahead of time, and you very an interesting person. So you have a YouTube channel. You are an art historian.
Right. Yeah, that's
Tell
kind
me.
of my real job, even though it's also like the weirdest job ever because I basically talk to people about art and it's super fun, but it's kind of weird like because I'm freelance, I'm not attached to any one arts organization or museum or what have you. I can
Okay.
actually partner with organizations that maybe can't afford to hire a full-time arts educator. Like,
Right.
arts never get funded, right? So they can hire me on a contract basis to maybe do a
Right.
series of lectures. And that way they're boosting what they offer their communities without going into debt or whatever, that kind of thing.
Right.
So
Right.
it's been an interesting ride to do it in the state of Florida, has added another level of interesting is how I will describe that. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a cool job.
We're going to dig into that a bit. Before we do, I'll put, I know you have a YouTube channel. What is the name of the channel?
Oh, it's the Wandering Art Historian.
Oh,
Everything I kind of use that as like a professional callback, if you will, just
right.
because I am freelance, so I'm wandering all over Florida. And I just talk to people about art. So the YouTube channel's cool. That came about during the pandemic, those
Right.
crazy times when we couldn't necessarily meet. Like lectures are, you hang out and talk to people, but we
Right.
couldn't do that. So I thought if I can maybe throw up some cool videos and get people like we were desperate for content back then. I don't know if you remember those
Yeah,
times, but um
absolutely.
whew, yeah, so yeah, check it
You
out.
know, it's interesting. COVID, I mean, was obviously horrible, but also a lot of the authors I've been working with all like had a writing dream for decades. And then it's like COVID was like this like reset
Yeah.
where they're like, wait a second, like do I have to do it the way I've been doing it just because I've been doing it that way? Like I got dreams and I got maybe this is the time I got a little free time. Like, oh, no more excuses. And a lot of authors just suddenly brought their books to life or a YouTube channel or whatever projects they've been kind of dreaming about but putting off and kicking the can down the road. So it was very interesting how that all played out.
Agreed.
Yeah,
I think when you remove all of the excuses, well, I don't have the time and I'm too busy and I'm out doing things. When you remove
right,
all of that and you're just left with yourself and a lot of time.
right. You're like, yeah. And honestly, I mean, I'm grateful for it. I think it's hard to have a dream for so long and not move on it. I think you like quietly punish
Yes.
yourself in a dull way,
Oof.
or like that's like that deathbed thing someday where you're like, oh, I wish I had, like and a lot of people have that. I mean, that's like a normal
Yeah.
part of, but I'm glad to see like so many authors like finally bring their dream to life, right? Like something they've thought about for so long and dreamt of the possibilities. Now they're like, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you about the art historian thing. I'm speculating at least that this was a passion of yours that you've had forever, that you found a way that you're like, oh, actually, people will pay me to do this. Like
Yeah.
as hard as that is, even for like probably you had to convince yourself, like, wait, people actually pay me. I feel like that with the books too. Like people will pay me to do this. Like wow. But tell me about it.
Absolutely.
How did that all get started?
Well, the emphasis on the wandering part, I was talking about this with somebody else where I'm a Gen Xer, I'm tail end of Gen X,
Mhm.
and we grew up with if you do well in high school and you go to college, you're gonna get a job, and then everything is fine forever.
Put in
And
your
that
30
is
years.
not
Yeah.
how any of that worked out. And I did go to school for art history, and I've worked in a few museums off and on through the years. And
Mhm.
my life just wandered around, and I really beat myself up over it.
Mhm.
Like, why am I must be not normal. My life did not follow the plan that I was told. And it got to a point where I realized I really strayed from my love, which is the visual arts. I love not not necessarily like the painting and the creation of the visual arts, that kind of goes with it. You like to
Mhm.
dabble and have fun, what have you. It's a creative outlet. But
Mhm.
talking to people about art, studying art, reading about art, I know the nerdiest thing ever.
No, no, no. It's wonderful. It's
I
wonderful.
am who I am. And when I realized that there was something missing in our community, I
Mm.
thought I can fill that void. And I
Yeah.
don't think people realized it was missing. That was the thing, too. So it's kind of, I had
Right.
to acknowledge it, but then I had to show other people, like, hey, this is what's missing in our community. And I did receive a lot of pushback when I very first started out. I had an arts organization that said, well, you can't be too academic because people will not want to do that. Turns out
Mm.
that's not the case. People want to talk about art, they just don't know where to start. So if you give
Right.
them a platform and encourage dialogue, you can. I have tackled amazing topics with people that just, it's kind of made me like have a teeny tiny little bit of hope for humanity.
Right. You're like, oh, people are
So
actually like interested in this. Like,
yeah,
well, maybe we're more interesting than I need to give humanity more credit for being. We're not
yes,
as dull and
that's it.
short. Yeah.
That's it.
Short attention span as I may think. Right.
Yeah, and 90 minutes used to be my lecture length. So to
It's
get
pretty
people to
good.
sit and engage and like throw out their opinion, feel comfortable enough to comment on the art, because that is
Right.
format.
Yeah.
Um, we have since I've scaled back to 60 minutes,
Still pretty
just to make
good
it
though.
a
I
little
mean,
bit more accessible, but yeah, crazy.
I have to imagine like if people are willing to show up in the first place to listen to it or, click on the video, it's like they are serious and they would like to know as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I think those human stories, like I talk about this with my wife, like when we talk about history and we talk about the people, she is so into it. But like the textbook history of just like on this date, it
Yes.
was like I can't connect it to anything. But like when you tell human stories, like when I hear about Caravaggio and he killed a guy after a game of tennis and then got paranoid and was sleeping with a knife under his pillow and putting himself in the paintings too. Like I think I've
Yeah.
never heard anyone say this, but the whole David and Goliath one, I swear it looks like his younger self killing his older self.
Okay,
And I've
so
never heard anyone say that, but I'm like, this guy can't help but put himself into the work.
how much time we got? No, just kidding.
I
Um,
honestly, I would love to talk Caravaggio and Jacques Louis David, and we could go all
Oh,
day.
you have hit the nail on the head. And that's
Mm,
because art history for so long, you go to these grand museums, and I love museums, don't get me wrong, I love them,
yeah.
right? They have these columns, the marble, and they look so stately, and and it's expensive to go, and you kind of get this feeling that art's only for some people, and you have to have an
Mm.
advanced degree, or you have to read all of those textbooks, and that
You're
is
very
not the
wealthy, very,
case.
very educated, all these things, right? Like it's a high class thing, and I'm just the peasantry.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's not it at all. So part of my goal is to make it accessible, remind everybody these were just humans. We put
Right,
them on pedestals. We put them on
right.
pedestals, but some of them were jerks, and
Yeah,
like some of them were not cool people. They did terrible things, and sometimes they did amazing things. So let's talk about that too. So
right.
yeah, the human story of it, and honestly, I've been as a lecturer and talking to people, you really are a storyteller.
Yeah,
That's
you
what
got
it
to be.
boils down to.
That's right. Absolutely. Oh, do you have a favorite? And that's probably very, very hard for you because you're like, oh, if any of it is missing, it would all be less interesting.
Yes.
But if there's someone who like every time I look at their stuff, and I feel like that about Caravaggio and Jacques Louis David. Every time I look at their stuff, I'm like, God, and I'm sure like they were probably both very, very deeply flawed in their But in this one thing, a painting, extraordinary and extraordinary souls having a
Absolutely.
difficult human experience.
Well, we're all deeply flawed, and that's what
Right.
puts us
Like,
on the same level. They just had this crazy talent, you know? And
yeah.
I have a whole host of favorites, and they're the ones I love to lecture people, like discuss. Leonora Carrington,
Mm.
I adore her. Frida Kahlo,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
super into her. Renee Magritte, I love those darn surrealists.
Yeah.
Uh, I love them. Marcel Duchamp, I'm huge into Dada. Like, the more
Mm.
abstract and high concept, the better. Like, I am
Right.
all about that. And if there's one thing that I will not shut up about, it is the golden age of Dutch Baroque painting. And that's kind of a running gag with all of my students because do not get me started. The whole weekend will be taken up
You
just
could
by
go all
talking.
day, all
Okay.
weekend on these.
Rembrandt, Vermeer. Oh,
Yeah.
just yeah, don't get me started.
There was one, I mean, and like this art can be so powerful. And we'll definitely get into books too, but
Yep.
I honestly I'm like I think people are so deprived of good conversations and so it's like
Yes.
I mean I'm like okay, yeah, let's talk
Yes.
because I don't get to talk about these things a lot. My dad told me a story once that has always stuck with me. Picasso did a painting called Guernica, and this was during like the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like the fascists came in and looked at this painting and they were like, "Did you do this?" And his reply was, "No, you guys did
Yeah,
this."
you're right, right.
And I was like, "Damn, like that was just like such a just badass statement, right?" Like I
And
was like,
I it's interesting because people don't we have blown Picasso up into this
right.
mighty figure, and he was short. He was a short, kind of stocky guy, and
Yeah.
it's he had some, I don't like to call them love interests. I like to call them entanglements
Okay,
because
he had some
I
entanglements.
think that's, I mean, that dude hooked up. But
Very polite way to say
that's
his
a very
deadly
polite way
thing
to
might
say
have
it.
been lust or something.
But Dora Maar, he was entangled with, and she was a photographer at the time, a surrealist
Mm,
photographer, and she was the one that really pushed him. Like, you're Spanish, you're the greatest artist alive. You kind of need to step it up and say something. And she
mm.
photographed the process of him painting that.
No
And
kidding.
so it's a cool team up that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, where it's kind
Right,
of like artist encouraging artists. Okay, here's the time to speak out. Let's use our
right.
art to do that. It's awesome. Awesome.
It's funny. I don't. And I don't, not to get too religious or spiritual, right? But I see like this fingerprint of it, right? It's like that painting needed to be made. It needed to be made when it was made. It needed to become available. It needed to be discussed. It needed to bring people in. And like he happened to be working on it with an entanglement who was a photographer who could help bring it to life. And I'm like, thank goodness all these things came together at once, right? I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
it's funny how things work out.
There's a lot to be said for serendipity and providence. And
Right.
one of the reasons why I love art so much is there's this great quote that says, artists don't create the zeitgeist, they react to it.
Mm,
And it's not the artists, and rightly so, they see what the time spirit, as the Germans would say, the spirit of the
mm,
times, and they react to it with their art. So they're helping say, okay, here are my big feelings. I'm going to make myself vulnerable and I'm going to put it out on this canvas. I'm going to take these photographs. I'm going to make this sculpture. And
mm.
thank goodness for them doing that because that's what moves us forward. And we stop and we say, oh, that's controversial. Ah, yes, but we are talking about it and we are
Right.
acknowledging this object that this person made. What's the next object that gets us talking? And
Right.
I love it.
I do want to push back on that a little bit though. I actually think, okay, so a lot of the authors in particular I work with, like I'm an author and painter, and I'm like surrounded by my paintings in this office. Some of them I dreamt, and I don't know where they came from, but have you ever heard of this idea of simultaneous invention?
Explain for me.
It's basically like this phenomenon throughout history where like two people or three people in different places around the world all invented the same thing basically on the
Oh,
same
that's
damn
cool.
day. And it's like
Very
almost
cool.
more like it's not like people invent things, but almost like the world is ready for an idea and certain people tune in like a radio. So
I
it's
get that.
almost like so I have this theory, like you ever heard of like Sentinel Island where they have like these uncontacted tribes?
Right.
Okay, so imagine if they saw an airplane going overhead and like there's an artist in the crowd who then draws the plane in the sand. And then the philosophers are like, oh, they're looking at the pieces and they're like, oh, this tailpiece kind of looks like our rudder on our boat. And like, oh, this shape is kind of like a bird. You know what I mean? And the point I'm trying to make is it feels like art comes before philosophy. Like
Ooh.
art is a matter of intuition, and then philosophy is the reason that tries to explain what the intuition is picking up on.
Oh, I'm digging that.
Right. So it's like the
Digging
art
that.
comes first before we even have the words to understand it. Like we can see it, we can feel it, we can sing it, we can dance it, but then we later on like what are the words that go with this thing to
Oh, I
to make
dig
it
that.
understandable? Yeah.
That's very visceral, isn't it?
Mm.
It's like tapping into the hunter gatherer. I gotta make the thing to express my big feelings. I gotta carve into I make the print, stick it on the cave wall, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then, I'm digging that.
Yeah.
Mm, I
Right.
like
Like
that.
those, okay, what were those cave paintings that Picasso
Yeah,
looked at? He said
Lascaux.
something like no human beings have ever made art this extraordinary ever again. It was
Yeah.
like the spirit of the animal somehow caught up in the movement and the flow. But then later on for thousands of years, we're like, what are the words that go with this thing we're seeing?
Ooh, mm,
Yeah.
I dig that stuff. I mean, like
Right.
that's humanity right there. That
Right.
is boiled down humanity.
Yeah.
Uh, I had a very fortunate experience that I was able to go to Ireland a few years ago.
Nice.
Dream of mine, and I visited a place that I had been bucket list or dream vacation, not vacation, but
Yeah.
destination,
Yeah.
called Newgrange, and
Mm.
it's a mound that predates the pyramids at Giza, and
Interesting.
it's fascinating because it's not just that it exists, it's like it's kind of like how we try to say like, well, the stones from here were not actually from here, they were quarried
Yeah.
from here and then they were transported here, and how did
Somehow.
these stone age people do that, blah blah blah. And it's not just that, it's the carvings
Okay.
inside and where they're placed. And the beauty of Newgrange is that on the winter solstice, approximately December 19th through 21st, it shifts.
Yeah.
Uh, Light, the sun, the rising sun comes over the hill and channels into Newgrange down a channel, a long, narrow, and it hits the back wall where there are these triple spirals that
Okay.
are very much connected with Irish folklore and what have you.
Yeah.
And how did they know how to do that? So I like the
Right.
mystery of that. I like the fact that humans are capable of great things when we team up. One
Yeah.
person didn't build Newgrange, one person didn't do all of the cave paintings at Lascaux. So it's like,
Right.
they were
These
responding to
collaborations.
something.
Oh God, we don't appreciate, I think, how sophisticated. But okay, I'll tell
Yes.
you a thing. There's things that philosophers get wrong all the time that authors get right. So, like, okay, a quick example is philosophers and tyrants will believe like, oh, the ends justify the means,
Sure.
right? Like, hey, we
Sure.
can do whatever. If the end result is so powerful and important, we can do whatever we want along the way to get there.
Right.
And then I've never found a novelist who got this wrong, who like a character does a terrible thing and gets away with it because the future they're building is so important. Like
Mhm.
they never get away with it. They
No.
conceal it, but somehow intuitively we understand. But then our reason gets this wrong. They're like, oh yeah, we can justify all manner of things. And our intuition,
Mm.
no, no,
Mm.
no. Skeletons don't stay in the closet, right? Um, every you read this a lot in like fantasy books. It's like the ancient magic is always powerful. It's always more powerful than the new magic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
somehow authors recognize that like the people who came before us were so sophisticated, so knowledgeable, so understanding, and they may not have like the things we have now like iPhones, but there were things that they understood so well that like
Mm.
we just can't catch up. And then modern kind of scientists, archaeologists, like I don't know, like we tend to diminish it, but people do understand that whoever built Giza, like they were extraordinary people. And
Right.
I think almost every author I've ever met believes that Atlantis was a place, but then every scientific mind is like, no, there's no chance, and
Hmm.
I don't know. It's yeah.
You tapped on something that just set off ring ring ring. You said old magic, and right there, that's C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
You could have you've brought up philosophy a few times, and I've seen
Oh
that
yeah.
in your that is a specialty of yours, and I dig that. That C.S. Lewis, he was in tune with some old magic, I feel like.
Right.
And
Right.
I think what's at the core of that old magic, and maybe it's why um authors are getting it when philosophers sometimes miss the mark, is
Mm,
the storytelling element. Those
mm,
early people, the only way that they could keep the history of their group going is they had to keep telling it over and over again. And they're like, this
right.
is who we are. We started over here. We ended up over here. This is what we learned in the process. A lot of those storytellers were women.
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of them had to, we don't eat these plants because this plant killed so and so 10 years ago. So we don't eat that plant anymore, but these plants are
Yeah.
safe. Like all of that is storytelling because we've got to
Right.
bring up those next generations. We got to arm them, prepare them with all of this information. We can do it in a fun, cool, creative way. And
Yeah.
then we send them on and we hope and we pray that they keep that going. I think this whole idea of being sophisticated just needs to be redefined because we have iPhones, but we're lonelier than ever because we don't talk to
Right.
each
We're more disconnected. Yeah.
other.
No, honestly, people don't appreciate that oral tradition piece. So,
Yeah.
like the Vikings, for example, have such a rich mythology,
Yes,
but
yes,
they
yes.
wrote nothing down.
No.
Like, I mean, they had wood carvings, but like that's about it. I mean, there's no like papyrus or something like this we're looking at. It was all just grandpa or grandma telling the story, and then the kids heard it so many times, and it meant so much. But one of these things we miss is how powerful stories are to get through into the unconscious mind, right? Like you
Oh
give
yeah.
someone the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments, we break them all the time.
For
But you
sure.
tell a story of how a fatal flaw destroys someone, and
Oh
we
yeah,
can
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, we can understand, we can see how that happens. We
Right.
don't have to just take someone's word for it. We can actually see it play out
Sure.
through a story and like, okay, I can learn a lesson without having to experience it. And that is the transmission of wisdom across time.
And we do a lot of that too with folklore
Yeah,
and even more recently urban legends, like
right.
which is I think just a descendant of folklore, we
Yeah.
and fairy tales and all of these amazing warnings and stuff like that. And believe it or not, I actually did some research on that stuff because
Mm,
I like fairy tales and myths and I like how they mean different things in different cultures and some of them are to
right.
scare you, but some of them are to empower you. And I wanted to play with those tropes, like all of those things that we come to expect from fairy tales, whatever,
Yeah.
like kind of subvert them or reframe them. And
Mm,
I did a lot of that with my story because to be perfectly honest, for this first book, I was like, I'm just gonna put everything out there. I'm not
right.
gonna hold back. I'm a reader. I want to write a book that I'd want to read. I'm gonna put all my favorite stuff into it. And tapping into that long history of storytelling kind of gave me the courage to do it.
I love it. How long, how big is the book? I mean, did you just like, so I'm looking, I have it pulled up 257 pages.
I mean,
That's
it's
pretty
a
good.
quick read. I
Yeah.
short chapters with
Okay.
titles, like it moves.
Yeah.
I'm not dilly-dallying around here. I get to the adventure, what have you. Um,
Right.
I I think it's about 77K. I think it's like the length of Carrie,
Yeah. Okay.
Stephen King's Carrie,
Yeah.
if you will. And it moves really fast. It's a very quick read.
Okay.
Which again, that kind of suits our time. I've been doing a lot of short stories personally, like reading and writing them because
Right.
it's kind of a nice, I only have X amount of time, so I can do choo and
Yeah.
go back to normal life. So,
I feel that. I just
yeah.
really quick. So I've written a couple full-size books, and it's almost like I waited too long and I had too much to say, and then they come out as these like giant encyclopedia looking,
I
and it's
love
like
that.
I don't even know who this is for because this just got too much. But then when you do a short story or a novella or novelette, you're like, we got one message, one plan. We
Yeah.
get in, we tell the story effectively, we get out. And those have been so much easier to market, so much easier to digest, so much easier to find the readers. And like they have one powerful moral teaching, and that's
Mm,
all they're trying to do.
yeah.
And it's like I do so much better with that. But
I
it's a
feel
good
that
way
for
to reach
real.
people. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for real.
So tell me
Um,
about your book. Do you have the elevator pitch down to you're very charismatic, which I appreciate you give lectures and you're teaching, about art. So like you know how to just like tell the story, right? And not
right.
just write the story, tell the story.
Indeed. And to do it in a way that doesn't give any spoilers, because we're in an environment where, oh God, you do not give the spoilers, right?
Right.
So my protagonist, she wakes up on the morning of her 80th birthday, swings her leg out of bed, and realizes she has three crane toes, bird toes, where her human foot was just the night before. And she is not surprised by this. She knows she's not human. She's transitioning into her next iteration, which is a avian, a bird. And
Okay.
so she wants to write her life story, all of her human experiences down before she turns into a bird completely and can't. And that's kind of the fairy tale element of it.
Right.
She comes across many different crazy characters and has different adventures, and she writes them all down. And then I am a fan of kind of open-ended storytelling where you don't get everything and you leave certain things up to the reader. I like
Right.
that in storytelling and films and TV and what have you. So I leave the ending kind of open so that the reader can interpret what was real and what was fantasy.
Right. Oh, like Big Fish or even
Life
like
of
Big Fish.
Pi,
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. This idea that could this be a grand metaphor for something? You can read
Right.
it straight through as like, oh, this is a hero's journey of a sort, and there's creatures and things that happen. You can go a
Yeah.
couple of layers down and pick up on some other themes
Right.
you want.
Well, really
So
quick, hold up your book. So it is the autobiography of an infinite being, or how I turned into a bird on my 80th birthday.
voila.
I love it. I the title gets me.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
so
you.
I know Florida has a lot of sandhill cranes, and I love them. I used
Yes.
to go to this place called the Crane Foundation. I learned all
Oh,
about these whooping cranes when I was a kid,
yeah.
and I was like, oh my God, that's extraordinary. And like they were down to something like 2 dozen in the entire world, and we've
Yeah.
brought them back to at least a couple hundred. Hopefully, it's a couple thousand now. It's been a while, but that was a success story of
Indeed.
good stewardship, good management, and
When
yeah,
humans work together,
right,
we can actually save a species from
yeah.
extinction, believe it or not.
We can
We've done
destroy
it
things, but we
before.
can we can also save things too. If
Yeah,
we
we
if
can
we
save
identify
things.
the problem and we get the
Yeah,
right people together, we can actually do incredible good and reverse a lot of damage we accidentally caused.
absolutely.
Yeah. I love the sandhill cranes. I'm in Tennessee now, so I get them flying over every spring, every fall, and I like hear them and they are extraordinary. I mean, just
They
extraordinary
they're
creatures.
the crane I specifically chose. I knew my character would turn into a bird, and I
Yeah.
was like, well, songbirds, the physics. I know it's kind of a magical tale, so the physics don't matter as much, but at
Right.
least cranes, like there are cranes that can reach up to 5 feet tall, and
Oh,
that
they're
is
big.
huge.
Yeah.
And researching the cranes, I realized again, the symbolism of the crane across multiple cultures. They are a
Right.
revered bird. They there's a belief that certain cranes can have the stamina to fly over the Himalayas. Like they are
Wow.
a magnificent creature and representing royalty in some cultures, fertility
Right.
in some cultures. There's a I've sprinkled a lot of symbolism throughout my book and a few art historical references. I don't get very preachy when it comes to my art history in my book, but there's a reference to the Celts who believed water birds were
Mm.
sacred because they connected the three elements. They flew in the air, they walked on the ground, and they
Ooh.
waded through the water to collect their food, and that they were a sacred creature. So there are references to uh, cranes of that sort, and waterfowl, and the
Yeah.
nymphs, and the elements, and all that kind of good stuff.
You
Like I
know, that
said,
thing
I just put
about,
all my favorite stuff in there.
I love it. That reference to like the crane walking between these three realms is a
Mm, yeah.
tremendous idea. So a lot of culture's been trying to bridge that gap. So you see it a lot, this idea of the feathered serpent or the snake and the
Oh,
dove in
yeah.
Christianity. They're like, okay, we need this thing that can fly to heaven, but this thing that is on the ground in like the lowliest place. And when you put the two together, you can kind of create heaven on earth or conquer yourself or whatever. Like that is the path to enlightenment kind of thing. So every culture's been looking for that animal that bridges this gap
Mm,
between, you
mm-hmm.
know, and so I don't know, I love that idea of like, because I mean that is true. Like cranes, sometimes you see them and they're like, I mean, they might as well be in heaven. They're like, I mean, they can get
Yeah.
so high, but then sometimes they're in the water, sometimes they're down in this lowly place with us, walking on the ground.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
it's a great symbol. I mean, but when I hear them, I'm like, I know I'm hearing a dinosaur. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is an ancient creature here.
I love that you said that because whenever here in Florida, they're everywhere. And
Right.
there's you hear them coming, and then when they're in the way our house is set up, we have kind of like a not a retention pond. We just call it the pit, whatever.
Yeah.
There's this big open space behind our house, and when they're walking along there, I can't help but sing like the Jurassic Park theme,
I
like oh
swear.
look at all the cranes. It's great because
Yeah.
every you see them take off and you're like, how is that not a pterodactyl?
Oh, they make
Like
like a running start. They're so
oh, yeah.
oh, I love them. That's a great
Yeah,
choice for
yeah.
for your main character and what she's becoming. What inspired the story? Like, where did it come from?
I'm glad that you asked.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, I will talk about this with some people. Like when you're at an event in a literary festival or whatever, and you do your elevator pitch, and sometimes it's just the fantasy of it all, the magical realism of it that
Right.
really draws people because fantasy is super in right now. We all want an
Yeah.
escape, but to be very blunt, it's actually my trauma story.
Okay.
And I retold it in this way because that's kind of how human stories go. We talk about Hansel and Gretel, and we talk about these different fairy tales and their
Yeah.
warnings to people because we can understand things like when a scary witch in the forest leads you with candy, don't go into the house, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
But I knew going into this that they write what you know. So I was like, okay, well, for this first book, I know this story about myself, and I had gone to
Yeah.
therapy in 2019, helped immensely,
Yeah.
and I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm just gonna go ahead and tell my own story this time. Like I'm just gonna put myself out there and be very vulnerable. And I think we have a tendency to I think we want to talk to people about heavy stuff. And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of uncomfortable and you don't know how to start and you don't know how far to go. And you're like, well, words like assault, and
Right.
things like that can be kind of, especially when it happens to kids,
Yeah.
it's
Then it's
it's a
yeah.
little it's a little yuck, nobody really wants to hear about that. So when you talk about a little girl who is up against vampires, then you can kind of convey big, dark, scary things in a way that, on some level, viscerally, I think nobody wants to come up against vampires, especially if you're a kid. So I
Right.
think that was the right way for me to put that out there. I don't think I'll ever do like a straightforward memoir because who cares? But like, I think kind of telling this terrible thing that happened to me as a kid, um,
Right.
in this format, I think I've planted enough clues throughout so that it can kind of open up like, oh, something like that happened to me too. Or, oh, I kind of connect with this part and that part. And that has been the very interesting thing that I did not see coming is people following up with me after to say
Right.
things like, hey, that through line of grief that you put in there,
Yeah.
thank you. Or that is touching something going on in my life right now, or what have you. And I didn't know that I was writing a book about grief. It's this bright yellow cover, and then
Right.
stuff happens. But I went back and I was like, oh yeah, this that's in there. So
See, that's what I mean about intuition and art, though, is like sometimes you don't even know what you made.
yeah,
Other
yes,
other people point it out to you. They're
yes.
like, "Oh, so interesting you did this." I was like, "Wait, I did that?" You're like, "Oh, yeah, no, actually, I do see your point. Yeah, totally." And but it comes from the gut. I love the idea though of like, let's take a very difficult subject and instead of telling it as like a child being attacked by adults and abused in that way, we're like, we're going to tell a story about knights and princesses and
Yes,
scary dark woods and vampires
right,
and I think memoirs are beautiful, but I feel like part of why they flop so often is like there isn't a resolution per se. They're not always stories of triumph and perseverance. A
yes,
lot of times they're stories of someone just finally letting go of like this baggage that's been weighing them
yeah,
down and it's a very healthy thing to do, right? As a cathartic thing, like write that down and address it so you don't have to walk around with it.
for sure.
But like it may not connect because it's too dark, it's too personal, and there isn't a hero's triumph necessarily at the end. Like that's the thing people are missing. But so I love everything you're conveying in this book. The description of like, okay, it's a very personal story, but I'm going to tell it in a way that could be anyone. It could be you, it could be me, and I might
Absolutely,
connect it in some way that totally different from what you set out. But if it
absolutely.
connects, it connects, and that's the beauty of art, right?
Exactly, because once you put it out there, it's not just yours anymore, you
Right.
know? And
Yeah.
to me, I think that's the best kind of art is that you can put it out there and be like, yeah, I started it, but then this person's going to continue it, and then the next person is going to
Yeah.
continue that. And again, it's all of us humans working together, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I like the idea that it's not just mine anymore, and I'm totally okay with that. This wasn't a vanity project. It was I
Sorry, I'm just gonna, yeah.
it's okay.
We got kicked out,
Um,
so we're back here. I didn't want to cut Adrian off short here because I having a lot of fun too, but also like
aw,
yeah, that keeps happening with Sue. Oh, it's
eh.
terrible.
But yeah, it was just something that it had been building. The pandemic was rough, and
Yeah,
felt like if I don't do this, like it had been brewing, I guess, in the back of my head. And there had always been joke, like I had people ask, like, when are you gonna write a book? And I was like, about what, and
yeah, yeah.
I kind of had that thing where it was like, if I don't do it now and the world goes back to normal tomorrow, I'm just going to be busy again and I'll have all of the excuses I did before. So I was like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to learn everything there is to learn about writing a book, self publishing. Like I studied word counts and different genres and so much. But
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
glad
There's
that
a
I
lot.
did all of that, though. I mean, I'm an art historian. I love research.
Yeah, it
Uh,
wasn't like like, oh, this is like my process. This is what I do.
exactly. So,
Yeah,
um, and I'm tired of not taking big swings. I'm tired of playing it safe. I'm tired of like imposter syndrome. I don't even utter the words anymore. Like I don't need that. Like
yeah.
it's absurd at this point with everything that's happening in the world. I'm like, I can write a book. Like, come on. Like this
Right.
is absurd. So I just did it. And thankfully I've only had a teeny tiny little one human being push back on me for self-publishing. And
Mm,
it's not somebody that I even care about. So oh well.
right. It's like whatever.
But yeah, I'm it's the thing I'm most proud of. So that's
Right.
cool. And as somebody who I'm a painter and different visual art mediums and what have you, who couldn't pick up a paintbrush anymore. Like I just could not do it. I
Huh.
I wanted to have one piece of art that I
Yeah.
thought was an Adrienne H. Lee from beginning to end. It is authentically me. And I did that. And I'm like, oh, well, now I can do anything.
Yeah. No, there's a lot. I got to bring you on the other podcast. So I have a second podcast that is all personal growth, personal development, spirituality.
Yeah,
But I
I've
love
had
what
it.
you're saying. Like, here's what I've been wrestling with lately. I was like, and I'm religious, but not, I'm not like, don't go to church nearly enough, all this kind of stuff. But I have this feeling that like we were put here to be extraordinary.
Mhm.
And it's not that we have to be in a showy way extraordinary. Like I have a 1-year-old son, and he is extraordinary. It's not that he's more extraordinary than anyone else's child. It's just that like that is his base nature. Is like every time he's, when he's learning to walk and he's saying his first words and he's learning new things. I mean, every time he smiles and you're like, I hear it across the house. I'm like, I got to go see what's so funny.
Yeah.
I mean, he's extraordinary the way that like, even the lowliest lion on the plains is extraordinary, right? And then somewhere along the way we forget that.
Yeah.
And we hold ourselves to some impossible standard of unworthiness that we wouldn't put on anyone else. Like we wouldn't be like, oh, anyone in my world is unworthy just because XYZ, whatever stories we tell about ourselves. Um, and I feel like the quality of our lives is largely defined by what we believe is possible for us.
Ooh.
Right. Like, you're not going
Hmm.
to go to the moon if you don't think that's an option. Like, you're not going to build a company if you don't think that's an option. Like, you're not going to learn about this if you think it's reserved for other people. So I was like, we need to stop putting these limits on ourselves about what we can do. So,
Mm.
like, I love everything you're saying that, like, you know what? I can write a book. I can make a piece of art that people might talk about it
Yeah.
100, 200, 300 years from now.
Yeah.
Like I might be able to join these extraordinary people that I've been studying my entire life. Like maybe I deserve to be in the room with them. And
Yeah.
we're going to try it, right? We're going to try something.
Well, yeah, boy, we're back to the art. We're back to the art.
Yeah.
I can't be someone who studies art for their whole life
Hmm.
and then say, well, why should I even try? Like Vincent van Gogh, what we adore Vincent van Gogh. That
Right.
dude struggled. He sold one painting. He was basically told again and again that like you're mad, you're crazy. What are
Yeah.
you doing? He struggled with mental health issues. He struggled with his own faith and where he
Right.
fit in with that. He was like people I mean, and they were brutal to his face. Like this was,
Right.
you know, and he persevered. All of the art that we have from him came in about 9 years, the last 9 years of his life. That's 2,000 pieces of art.
Wow.
And what's shocking is now, hindsight, we think, oh, thank God for Vincent van Gogh. What would humanity be without someone like that? And this was a man
Right.
who tortured himself mentally, thinking like, he was so lonely, he could not find a human connection, and he desperately wanted that. Thank God he had Teo, his brother.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so I
Uh,
sell 100 copies of this book, but at least I was authentically me doing it, and
right.
I told a story only I could tell. No one
Yeah.
else could have painted those Van Goghs. No one else could have painted sunflowers or the night sky like
Right.
Van Gogh. And yet we put those things on tote bags and watches, and we
Oh,
wear t-shirts and
everywhere.
sneakers, and I've got collectibles. They're not toys, they're collectibles. But
Right.
regardless,
God, I
yeah,
was thinking about
so
like,
who's to
could this
say?
guy, while he lived, could he imagine how many people
No.
have seen his paintings now? Like, there's no. But as you're talking, there's so much to unpack in there. One is a quote that came from someone like Tesla or someone like this, who was like, if you're one step ahead of society, they call you a genius. And if you're two steps ahead, they call you insane.
Right.
Van Gogh was
Absolutely.
like very much on that level. But as
Absolutely.
you're talking, like you're describing his life, and it is funny we glorify the guy, but his life was, I mean, just pure pain and suffering.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of selling your soul. It's like, oh, you like selling your soul is like I could be a famous musician, but I'm going to give up my immortality.
Yeah.
And this was like the opposite. Like I'm going to give up my just worldly existence and
Yeah.
all the pleasures in it to do something, some extraordinary expression of my soul that will not be understood in my lifetime, but my name will walk with humanity for all their days, kind of thing. Um,
Indeed.
profoundly difficult path. And I think what does make him extraordinary, I didn't know that all of his paintings were the last 9 years of his life.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is after a million opportunities for him to quit, to be like, I'm losing my mind. I should give up. This isn't working. It's not connecting. No one cares. No one is noticing. I'm getting, and it's like, when there was no one left believing in him except maybe himself and his brother, I'm going to double down and keep going,
Yeah.
even though there is literally nothing in my world that tells me it makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean,
We respect that so much, but it is so hard, and so few of us have the courage to be like that.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
you think it's like, again, I struggled with, oh, my life wasn't a straight line. I didn't do high school, college, job, whatever. Poor Vincent, that dude tried everything. And at a
Right.
time, the end of the 1800s, you still have class. You have to think of where you are in society, how much
Yeah.
money you have, how you look, how you appear to people, how you
Right.
communicate with other people. And it was, we're not doing it through screens, we're doing it one on one. So you have to like really turn it up a notch. And he
Yeah.
was not
Yeah.
a people person. He could not talk to people. He wanted to be by himself. He wanted to read his books.
Hmm.
He didn't care about the clothes. He wore his boots out until they literally fell apart.
Yeah.
And he caught flack from his own family for that. Like, don't you know who you are? You were a Van Gogh, our prestigious family. And he was so
Ooh.
searching. He did so many different jobs, and he just
Yeah.
couldn't. And it was his brother that was like, you're dancing around this issue. Like, and his brother was the opposite, wildly successful gallerist in Paris and
Yeah.
selling art to these up and coming bourgeois, Parisians, what have you.
Right.
And he's like, look, if I can fund you, would you give art a try? And Vincent's like, oh, great. And disappoint our parents even more. But he
Wow.
but he did it. He did it, and he stuck with it. And he, like you said, he had so many opportunities to give up, and he didn't. And the output are these
Just
amazing works of art. Like,
extraordinary, like schizophrenic, shamanic, on the edge of reality and the dream world, the unconscious world. I mean, just like profound, extraordinary paintings that like
yeah,
we could have endless discussions,
yeah,
endless study, endless observation. We talked about serendipitous events, and like thank goodness his brother was someone who not only believed in him but had the means to actually invest in him,
yeah,
encourage him, but also, and this is funny. I mean, there's actually this whole conversation feels serendipitous because like we're talking about one thing and then it's kind of hyperlinked to something later. We're talking about you're studying art and you're like, oh, all this nerdy stuff. And I wanted to say, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like, but thank goodness you have that passion because like the entire world is more extraordinary because, and I believe like God gives us the desires of our hearts, right? Like there's no good way to explain why do so many people have so many different interests. And it's like, it's not obvious how like our love for writing books or painting is going to help us to like find food. Like there's no obvious like
yeah,
reptile brain hunter
right.
gatherer value in like, oh, I'm going to take these berries we work so hard to pick and I'm going to take the red color and make a painting. And you're like, great, I'm starving, I'm really hungry, why are you wasting our food?
For real. That's
Thank goodness, thank goodness, right? I mean,
awesome.
the world is so much more interesting because you have your passions and I have my passions and someone had the passion to make Zoom and these computers and now we can do this and like,
Absolutely.
thank God the world is this
Yeah.
interesting and human beings are this complicated.
And I joke about being a nerd and stuff like that, but I'm super proud of it. I'm at a point in my
Right.
life where I know who I am, and I have a weird gift. I can talk to people about art. And yeah, it's extremely niche, like I get that. But also I think it makes me a good storyteller. I
Yeah.
can challenge people to do a little bit more critical thinking. I think
Right.
I can interest people in history, which, you say history and then you're like, oh, that's civics class and all, government in high school, and I got to learn the Revolutionary War. And
It
it's like,
feels niche
yeah,
too, right? It's like, but history doesn't have to be niche. This is
it
people.
sure doesn't. No,
Yeah.
it's our shared existence. And
Yes. Yes.
so, and granted, that's decades of undoing the things that you hear as a kid. Like,
Right.
you're weird. And I'm like, actually, I'm creative,
Yeah. Yeah.
you are an overachiever. Actually, I have high standards and things that I want to accomplish. Like, you have to undo those things.
Or
And
reframe them, right? Like there's a polite way.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a polite way and there's a rude way to say that, you know,
Yeah.
this person is a nerd. It's like, no, no, this person is deeply curious.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And thank
Yeah.
God, like you said, that we have deeply curious people. That's how
Right.
we, you know, solve problems. That's how we address the issues that are facing humanity today, if we're willing to
Right.
take them on.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like my any piece of art that I create is going to change the world, but it changed my world. And I
Mm.
feel like if I can be honest about who I am and whatever and put that out, I feel
Yeah.
like maybe it will encourage somebody else to be honest about who they are. And
Right.
maybe they need to say, oh, I've been grieving and I didn't know that until I read this book. Or, oh, I'm intrigued by some of these themes. Maybe I will give you know, give a shot at writing myself. And all of that is what art is supposed to do. You pass that on to the next person, they
I'll
pass it
tell
on to
you,
the next.
you got my wheels turning in such a big way. Like this is no, this is an amazing. This is like all I ever want to talk about.
Yeah.
Imagine if someone like Picasso read your book. You
Oh,
gave them a little, no, 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 but like, hear me out. Imagine they read your book and they're like, you know what? This person had the courage to be deeply vulnerable. I respect courage. And then when the time comes and he needs to paint Guernica, he's got a little bit more courage because he read your work.
you
Like
never know.
that is the thing we do for one another. Like there's,
That's true.
I mean, I don't, and I think about I read legal transcripts for a living. I have a business doing that. So like I read about attorneys and then I used to work in sales and I'm astonished by how many adults will say or do anything to get what they want. And it's like it's a scary thing, but like there comes a place like when let's say Nazi Germany is becoming Nazi Germany where there's 10% of the people who are in on this horrible thing. And then there's a bunch of people who just don't speak up at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
profound, extraordinary, vulnerable art, even though like we give a piece of ourselves, like a little bit of our soul that we'll never get back, putting it in
Yeah.
there. And whoever reads it may know us better than we'll ever know them. And it's horrifying, scary thing. You know, maybe that little bit of courage that we put out there could be the courage that a lot of people need to just give them just a little push they need to do the right thing and speak up and prevent something terrible someday. You never know.
That's right. And I tell people, and I don't say this as self-defeating or whatever, like if
Yeah.
I can do it, you can do it. If anyone can do it, you can do it. And
Right.
I don't say that as like, oh, blah, me, whatever. It's like, no, seriously, I just learned how to do it and then I stuck with it and I did it. So if
Right.
you are willing to put in the work, and I, I maybe that's the thing that turns people off creatively is they don't realize that art takes work and practice and discipline sometimes. And
Yeah.
I'm somebody who does not like rules or of any kind, but
Yeah.
the one thing that got me through this book is you write every day.
Yeah.
You write every
Yeah.
day. And that one little thing was just enough drip, drip on that water wheel to keep it going that I just was able to see it through to the end. So,
That's the way to do it. It's like if you look at the whole mountain, you know, it's very, very intimidating to go climb the
yes,
thing. But
yes,
you
yes,
know, if
yes.
you got the passion, and here's the thing I try to, and this is what I'm going to explain to my son is like I heard this profound thing. This girl was talking to her mom, and the mom is like, "Oh, why don't you go to med school?" And she's like, "Oh my God, I'm going to be in school for 10 years." The mom's like, "Those 10 years are going to pass whether you're in med school or not. Like you
Right,
might as well be a doctor on the other side of that."
right.
You know,
Exactly.
and it's like the next
Exactly.
year is going to come and go. And like, what would you rather have another year where like you don't really feel like you've made progress, or you write 500 words a day, and after a
Yeah,
year, like, hey, I have an entire book I wrote, and no one knew about it. And
exactly.
here it is, and you're like, oh my God, I made something. Like, whoa,
Exactly. And once you have like that chunk done,
yeah,
everything else is superfluous. It's like then you get to like connect the dot. And that's how I approached this book too. I thought,
yeah,
okay, well, I know I have X amount of stories that need to happen to my character. So I wrote them almost like short stories. Like I'm just gonna
nice,
sit and type all of this out. Okay, that one's done. Sit and type all of this out, and that's done. And I call that like you're literally building your story from the bones up. You have to have the
Nice.
bones, the structure first, okay? And then when you have all of that, and you're like, okay, well, now I have to connect these. And that's super important because that's how you problem solve. I do not like loopholes. I do not like plot holes. I do not like things like, well, what happened to this, you know? And connecting those dots, that's where you add the ligaments and the muscle and stuff like that. And then you
Yeah.
start refining the process. That's you're laying the skin on top of your creature. It's kind of morbid or macabre to talk about it like
Yeah, we could
like
describe it like a house too. It's like the
there
bones
you
are good, and
go.
then you're like, okay,
That's
now we
not
need
as terrifying.
the crown molding, the trim, the finished carpentry work. Let's put the doors on, the shutters. A little less
Apologies for going directly to Frankenstein's monster or what have you, but
limb by limb, we're putting this thing together,
right,
and we're
exactly.
gonna shock it to life. Yeah. No, I will. I'm gonna let you go in a minute. This was an amazing conversation. I had
Same.
no idea what. So most of the authors I interview, I meet them on TikTok. So like I see their videos, they see mine, and you and I didn't know really anything about each other. But like,
Not really. I did
I
a
mean, this
little bit of
is
research on you because
I
I
did
knew
too,
about
yeah. But
myself.
I was like, you know what? Let's do a podcast. And then afterward, I'm like, let me do some
For
digging
real.
on you. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, like you're doing so much cool stuff. You've got a
Aw.
YouTube channel that I'm gonna like love and appreciate. There's,
Aw.
I was like, you know
Thanks.
what? Thank goodness I met you. I mean,
Aw.
it's like I love when these doors are open and you're
Yes.
meeting the people you want to meet somehow, and
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely
opportunities. I mean,
agree.
whatever it is, they're coming in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll do this again for sure. Do you have like a sequel or anything on the way, or another book? Are you still keeping the writing thing alive, keeping it going?
Yes.
Hey,
Had a big epiphany a couple of weeks ago in the shower, of course, because that's where you have your
that's where they
epiphanies.
happen. Yeah,
When I
yeah.
realized that the two projects that I was working on were not separate, they were actually the same thing, and that gave
Hey,
me a lot of clarity. Um,
yeah.
Life has been kind of a little chaotic and sad for me lately, so I switched to writing some short stories to kind of
Right.
help channel my big feelings,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that has helped. But yes, back to writing every day for next big secret project.
I
And
love it. Keep it close to the. There's a
so
saying, don't scatter
fun.
your forces.
It's
And this is
great.
like sometimes you share an idea with the wrong person or too
Right.
soon, and if they don't
Yeah,
feel what you're feeling, like just you feel like deflated. So I tell authors, keep it close to the chest.
that's right.
Do not let yourself get deflated. Don't scatter
Nope.
your forces. You keep them. You got one or two confidants, and then after that, like your dream is very personal. No one else is going to understand it,
Nope.
but you'll have a book to hand them someday, and then they'll understand it.
That's right. They will. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to put all your links in the description.
Cool.
Obviously to your book. Do you want any of this like Instagram, any of the social medias?
Yeah,
Channel for
I'm
sure for your YouTube channel. We'll do
Instagram
that.
is a great way to keep in touch. I prefer that it's visual. So I
Yeah.
need the visual component. I have my blog. If anybody wants to read more about like my nerdy adventures,
I
that's where to
do.
go, art and books and stuff like that. And the YouTube channel, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, I'm out there. I'm out there doing stuff. So
You're available, visible. I'll tell you
yeah.
one thing. Here's an advantage. I don't want to call it an advantage, but it's going to help you a lot with your writing. A lot of the authors I work with are very, very introverted people. And I think
Yes,
that's probably kind of your nature, right? Like you're studying and doing all this stuff, but you're like, hey, if I'm going to teach people about it, like I got to put myself out there a little bit.
for
And
sure.
you got a little comfortable with this whole like, hey, speaking with people. A lot of authors are very, very, very shy. So it's like they may have an extraordinary book, but like they're not really ready to talk about it.
Right. I
Yeah.
have a teeny tiny little secret power superpower.
Okay.
I am a former theater major, which
Okay.
luckily answers a lot of questions at this point. I did that. That was my art that I was making through high school and the first 2 years of college.
Nice.
And it was a great creative outlet and what have you. I learned a
Yeah.
lot about myself doing that,
Oh yeah.
improv, and but that's also where I got rid of all of my shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, I don't have a problem talking to people, and that has proved beneficial with lecturing.
Oh,
So
for everything in your
yeah,
life, right? I mean, like, because
yes,
everything is about being able to self-advocate, and
absolutely.
like at
So
a young age, if you can get over that whole, because I mean, the public speaking and stage
yeah,
fright thing is one of the biggest for something that can't actually hurt you or kill you. People are so scared.
that's so accurate. If you can
Yeah.
take an improv class through your local library or arts organization or local theater group, just do it for like a summer or whatever. Just do it, get it out of the way. You will come with a new appreciation for yourself and
Okay.
what you can overcome, I feel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do it.
No, that's a powerful, powerful thing. I mean, no matter what someone's path is through life,
Yeah,
having that ability to like, listen, I can say what I got to say and do what I got to
yeah,
do.
that's right.
Like that's going to serve you everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Adrian, this has been amazing. I
Ah,
appreciate you
so
coming on
good.
here. I'm gonna go check out some of your YouTube videos. I want to learn more about art too, because I I
Yay.
need I need that constant connection to art. I feel if I get too much in like the whole like, oh, paying the bills and like all the practical things, you
Yes,
feel like disconnected. It was like I need to walk outside, I need to look at a Caravaggio painting and read a good book and just feel that I'm part of this extraordinary, ancient, sophisticated journey here and get,
absolutely.
yeah,
I
get
I
my
totally get
feet
that.
rooted back in the ground on it.
That's right. You got to do
Yeah.
it.
This has been awesome. Standing off for you, I'd love to have you back on here anytime, especially, when the next book, when it's ready, when you got the launch coming up, I'd love to have you on here and talk about it. And
Absolutely. This has been delightful, and I
yeah,
agree with you. You said this a while back. Like, I think part of the reason why podcasts are so everyone is endeared to them is it's that conversation again, talking
yeah.
about cool things, connecting humans, connecting, and I really appreciate you having me on because this has been
Oh,
great.
yeah. No, you make it. God, we could go all day. Well, you make a good point because, like, well, the people we see the most are like mostly our work colleagues, but like,
Right.
you're kind of wearing a mask at work, right? You're like, oh, like
Yes.
I got to walk on eggshells, be very, very careful here. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then the news is just people lying to you. So, like, anytime you can be part of an authentic conversation that's
Absolutely.
vulnerable and honest and imperfect, and who knows where it's going to go, it's like, I miss that. It's like when you're in high school and you stay up till 3 a.m. talking, you're like, oh my God, look what time it is. And you're like,
Yeah.
people miss that real human thing. So,
Yeah.
podcasts, they have a place, and
That's
art
right.
has a place. All of it has a place. And I think the whole market's going to only get bigger for this because people want the real thing. So,
Agreed. Agreed.
yeah. Hey, we will talk soon. And I will let you know when this is done. It's probably going to be a couple days to do the edits and everything, but this has been awesome. I had a great
Yes.
time.
I
Yeah.
did too. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I love talking about art, obviously, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm going to check out your YouTube channel and I might email you and be like, hey, listen, I want to talk about this one.
Yes,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
might
That's
go
what I'm
down a
here for.
rabbit hole after watching some videos. Yeah.
Awesome.
Wonderful. I appreciate it, Adrian.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. We'll see you again soon.
Okay, we'll see you.
All right. Bye bye.